It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. The Darnay family survived in both good times and bad. They came from different backgrounds and different lifestyles. However, they grew to care and love for each other. This was a family that went through so much and yet stuck together by loving one another. During the French Revolution, they went through a great struggle, but with the help of loving and supporting friends, they ultimately triumphed. This is the story of the Darnay family. The Evrémonde brothers were the two men who had ruled over the chateau they lived in, as well as the town of Saint Antoine. These brothers were cruel and selfish. They killed and raped people and did not care whatsoever. All they cared about was themselves. One of the brothers had a son named Charles, who would eventually inherit this dreadful legacy that would be left behind by his father and his uncle. Charles's mother wanted him to redress the actions of his forefathers when he was older. However, Charles did not want to be part of the legacy of his forefathers, so he moved to England, where he was a French teacher and held the name Charles Darnay. Charles Darnay was a young man who had moved to England to escape from his family. Little did he know that his family would come back in his life and cause big problems for him. He was set up by his uncle, Monsieur the Marquis, for treason in England. The Marquis had hired two spies named Barsad and Clyde to frame Charles for treason. He was eventually acquitted with the help of a new friend named Sidney Carton, who would eventually end up helping Charles in a much bigger way. Soon after this trial, Charles fell in love with a beautiful woman named Lucy Minette. The two eventually got married and had a child named Lucy. Life was good for the Darnay family for a while, until Charles's forefathers would come back and cause problems again. However, Charles was helped through this time of trouble by his wife Lucy and her father, Dr. Alexander Minette. Dr. Alexander Minette began his life as an upcoming doctor in France. He encountered a situation involving the Evrémonde brothers. The brothers had raped and stabbed members of a peasant family, and they wanted Dr. Minette to come attend to those wounded peasants. The brothers did not really care, though, about what they had done. Dr. Minette was opposed to their actions, and this would ultimately land him in the Bastille prison for 18 years. During his imprisonment, his mental state changed and left him as a quiet and hollow man. However, with the help of his daughter Lucy, who Dr. Minette had never seen before, and an old friend Jarvis Lorry, he was recalled to life. Over time, things got better for the doctor, but worse for Charles Darnay. Charles was imprisoned in La Force in France, after he had returned to help a friend named Monsieur Gabelle. Dr. Minette tried hard to save Charles using his story of his imprisonment. However, this story would end up hurting Charles in the long run. Lucy Minette was also a huge supporter of her husband during his time of troubles. Lucy Minette was a beautiful woman who was the wife of Charles Darnay. She supported him throughout his time of troubles. During Charles's imprisonment at La Force, Lucy would go to the wall outside the prison and hoped to catch a glimpse of her beloved husband. After her father's letter about the Evrémonde brothers was read in court, Charles was found guilty and sentenced to death within 24 hours. Immediately after the sentencing, Lucy knew that she needed to be caring and supporting towards her husband in this time of crisis. This was the way she acted towards many situations. When her father was living in Defarge's building, and she and Jarvis Lorry went to go save him, she was so sweet and kind towards her father, who she had never met. Throughout his recovery, she was loving and supporting. However, Lucy Minette wasn't the only one who was helping out. The Darnay family had a bunch of supporting friends who helped them out in Charles's time of crisis. The Darnay family had many supporting friends who helped them through times of trouble. Jarvis Lorry was a lifelong friend of the Minette family. He had helped them recall Dr. Minette to life and bring him back to England. While Charles and Lucy were on their honeymoon and Dr. Minette had a relapse, Jarvis Lorry, with the help of Miss Pross, helped bring him back to his normal self through conversation. Jerry Cruncher was an assistant to Jarvis Lorry, who had quite an interesting profession on the side that involved grave digging. However, while the Darnays were in France, he acted as a bodyguard for the family. Sidney Carton, however, was probably the greatest friend the Darnay family had ever had. Sidney, who was a drunken lawyer, made the ultimate sacrifice to save his friend Charles Darnay, but he also did this so he could be remembered as a good person. He switched places with Charles in La Force and went to the guillotine in his place. The loyalty and dedication shown by these three friends really represents the meaning of true friendship. However, there were also people in France who were not friends of the Darnays, like the Defarges. The Defarges were citizens of Saint Antoine. They held a particularly large grudge against the Darnays, not only because Charles was an émigré, but also because of Charles's forefathers. The members of the peasant family that had been raped and murdered by the Evrémonde brothers was the family of Madame Defarge. They had killed her brother and caused the death of her sister, so she wished death upon the Darnay family. She wanted vengeance for the death of her family members. Monsieur Defarge was also a revolutionary like his wife, but he was not as harsh. Both of them were glad the revolution was taking place because they and members of their community had been oppressed by the aristocracy. Monsieur Defarge had a little sympathy for Dr. Manette, though. In the end, the revolution went along, but Madame Defarge's wish for vengeance did not come true. She was killed by a gunshot, and the Darnay family lived on.